Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm very grateful to my colleagues who are with me today to take part in this press briefing after the gathering that's taken place over the course of this morning and early afternoon. And I'll say a few words and then we'll open up to questions. I've got a list of journalists who are here to ask questions. First of all, I would recognise that this has been a discussion which I would characterise as a start of a process. We've had a very respectful, candid, open and challenging discussion about the issues that I wanted to draw people together to address, issues around the challenges that we face in our society today, particularly in addressing the feelings of disaffection that some in our society face and the challenges that we face from a variety of pressures around inequality, around discrimination, around media and disinformation, around trust in politics and around democratic participation. And how I would characterise the discussions we had this morning were conversations that addressed these particular themes and related them to the challenges that we face within our society. I summed up this morning's session by drawing on a comment that Sarah gave to us as the Chief Executive of a very long-standing organisation in Scotland which has been focused on bringing people together on a consistent basis over its 90-year history. And the comment that Sarah made was that we were addressing the value of creating the common good, the value of creating common ground amongst our participants. And that was the way in which I summarised this morning's discussion, recognising that we'd all come together in a spirit to address challenges to our democratic systems and our society and to find ways of addressing that. At the close of the afternoon session, I reflected on 4 outcomes for the discussion. First of all, that we needed to develop counter-interventions to the threats to our democratic system and to the way in which our democratic system operates. Secondly, that we need to create positive relationships and engage people in our society on these issues. It's no good us just having a conversation in this room amongst ourselves. We have got to reach out to communities in Scotland and we've got to engage with people. Thirdly, I appealed for those present to reach out through their networks to strengthen our democracy, our society and the participation of individuals within our society. And lastly, I offered the Scottish Government to help to advance this dialogue and to engage others on this dialogue to make sure that we strengthen our democracy and strengthen participation in our democratic system. The government cannot do all of this. It is even, I think, beyond the reach of all political parties. It requires our society that believes in the values that are represented, for example, on the parliamentary mace, of that wisdom, compassion, justice and integrity should be at the heart of our decision-making, that those are reflected in the conduct of debate and dialogue within our society. So that's a summary of what we discussed today. I stress this is the start of a process, it is not the end of a process, and the government will work with others to facilitate discussion on advancing this agenda within Scotland today. So I'll leave it there, and I'm very happy now to open up to questions. And in taking those questions, I will have my list here. And I'll come first of all to Ewan Petrie of STV. Ewan.
Thank you, First Minister. You talked this morning about tackling anti-democratic forces. Now, Reform were outside this building this morning labelling you and others democracy deniers. So do you class Reform as being anti-democratic?
Well, what I'm about, Ewan, and what the purpose of today has been about recognising the threats and the challenges to our democratic system. And what I've tried to do today in good faith is to bring together a very broad cross-section of Scottish opinion, to reach out to our communities, to engage our communities, and to make sure that as we look at the global threats and pressures that exist towards our democratic system, that we are able to address that effectively, and that will be the focus of the discussions that we take forward. Lindsay Buse.
Thank you, First Minister. Some have characterised today's summit as a bit of a talking shop. What do you think has practically and tangibly been achieved by today's event?
I think what's been achieved, and by the way, I don't intend to answer all the questions, folks. I'll happily involve anybody else who wants to make a contribution. I think what's been achieved today is that we have brought people together to engage in the start of a conversation about how we act emphatically to protect our democratic system. Because what I don't want to find myself in is I don't want to find myself in some years to come regretting that I have not taken a stand on the threats that we face, whether that's about the threats of disinformation in our debate, whether that's the threats to participation in our politics because people find the climate and the culture off-putting, or whether it's about the fact that we don't fundamentally stand up against sentiments and initiatives and actions that are fundamentally at odds with how I think Scottish society wants to proceed, so that we actually tackle the fundamental issues of inequality, of intolerance, of prejudice, of disrespect in our society. So I'm not for a moment going to say that today is the end of the process. Today is the start of the process, and it opens up that opportunities for us to take that forward. Alex.
Please. Can I first of all say that I welcome the contribution that people made this morning. It was important to hear from charities, businesses, members of different faith groups. And I think there is the issue of prejudice and hate, and that going beyond party politics, and us showing a united front against all forms of prejudice and hate in our society. But if we are going to challenge disenfranchisement and division in our politics, then we have to address government failure, and we also have to address the fact that what today can't be allowed to look like is somehow the Scottish establishment coming together to talk to itself about itself and actually not doing the meaningful things that make a difference to people's lives. And the harsh reality is that people across our society feel as if government doesn't work for them, the economy doesn't work for them, public services don't work for them, and different institutions don't work for them. And fundamentally, unless we address those challenges, we will continue to see people push towards divisive rhetoric and divisive political parties. So yes, open democracy means disagreement, debate, but we can't allow that to get into dislike and hatred. But fundamentally, if we're going to challenge this, is we've got to improve people's lives.
Can I come in?
Please, Alex, yes.
Thank you, yes. I think we talked a lot about disaffection and the fact that lots of people are not voting anymore and people are moving to the extremes. And in large part, that's because I think to re-engage people, you need to govern well. And they don't feel governed well, either in Scotland or in London. And more to the point, I think that there is this sort of view that the last thing this should be is appear like a new ivory tower, which is yet a further disconnect from those people who feel estranged. I mean, that would just be consolidating their worldview. I made the point in the discussion this afternoon that I think we should, as a next step, seek to harness the views of those who have become estranged from politics or who are attracted by the extremes, to understand what has gone wrong for them. Why is the status quo not working for them? What is the failure of the Scottish Government or the Parliament or the Council that serves them? What has let them down, and how do we fix it? Because I think it's only by governing well, by reconnecting with them, by being seen in their communities, that they can have a tangible route to their elected representatives, that can we reconnect them. So yeah, this is the start of the process. We've engaged in good faith, but it's not been about locking people out.
Okay, James Cook.
Thank you, First Minister. I mean, one of the areas of perhaps the deepest contention in Scottish politics recently has been the issue of gender. I wonder if I could just ask all the panel a simple yes or no question, which is, in your view, are trans women women? I don't know if we could start with Ms. Regan, maybe.
Sure, thank you. Well, as we've heard from the Supreme Court last week in that absolute landmark ruling, trans women are not legally women, and that has large implications right across the public and the third sector in Scotland. My view on this is that I was very disappointed yesterday with what the government set out in their statement, because I still felt that the people that had risked so much of their reputations, and I would obviously include 4Women Scotland, but there are many other women and some men that have done that, have put a lot on the line for this, are still being patronised and are still being talked down to as if somehow we weren't, the ones that were right about this thing all along. The government need to take leadership on this now. They can't wait any longer. Women are being impacted on this up and down the country. The best example of that recently, obviously, is the Sandy Peggy case in Fife. These cases shouldn't be continuing, and the government need to draw a line in the sand now. I believe they need to apologise to the women of Scotland for what has gone on and the nonsense that has been perpetuated onto the country, so that we're able to rebuild that, and then we can continue to, I think, maybe perhaps reset the relationship. I think this has had a damaging effect on the institutions of Scotland, particularly the government, but also the Parliament as well.
Okay, I don't think we've got the space for us all to answer the question.
Well,
there'll be
given your First Minister,
there'll be plenty of opportunities for us. Patrick.
I think one word of balance might be helpful. My short answer to your initial question is yes, but it's not difficult for you to find issues that there'll be political disagreement about on a whole range of different issues on the people on this panel and beyond. The issue that's brought us here together is far more important than that, far more profound than that. And a great many of the people who took part in today's discussion talked about the way in which the marginalisation and stigmatisation of individual minority groups, many of whom feel deeply afraid at the moment because of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, that can lead to even worse. And we see that in the US, where what began in many ways as demonising very small marginalised minorities has become a full-on ideological purge. The threat to our democracy goes far beyond any one particular issue, and it goes beyond the disagreements that we might have amongst this group about those particular political issues. The threat to our democracy is that we end up in this country with something every bit as dangerous as what is happening in the US at the moment. And that's what should unite us.
Okay, and for my part, I accept the statement was given yesterday to Parliament by the Social Justice Secretary, which represents my position, the government's position, that we accept unreservedly the Supreme Court judgment. And as a consequence of that, we have actions to take in relation to the design of regulation, which will have to take place in dialogue with the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which we will take forward.
So trans women are not women in your view?
So we'll take Tony Maguire, please.
Hello, First Minister. I'd just like to ask yourself, I guess, this summit has been touted as a democratic conference to safeguard Scotland's democratic values. Do you think that's still upheld, even though one-party reform in this case was not invited to the table, and is that still retain its democratic nature?
Well, what I decided to do when I set out this idea, Tony, was to invite all the current parliamentary parties, and they were all invited, and I'm grateful to my colleagues who have come. It's a matter of regret to me that Russell Finlay decided not to come as leader of the Scottish Conservatives. I think it would have helped to draw that, different dimensions to the conversation had he been here, but that's a matter entirely for Russell. So I think it's important that we lead that conversation from within the parliamentary parties, but that we also recognise the importance of engaging with communities. So the discussion does not just start and stop inside this room, it has got to be taken outside, which is why I was drawn together, the voices that I've drawn together to try to have this important discussion. Please, yes.
Just to supplement that point is, I think one of the lessons we can learn from other parts of the world is not focusing on the big personality or a party brand, but actually the issues that underlie why people feel a sense of disenfranchisement and why they then go towards divisive political parties. And that's what I'm interested in, that's what many of the people that were here this morning were interested in, is how do you address the underlying inequalities around housing, around public service, around the economy that makes people give up on institutions and therefore push towards those kind of divisive politics and politicians.
Okay, Alan Smith.
Thank you. If I could just bring Ros into the conversation. We spoke yesterday about this summit, and you said your main concern was all of this becoming some sort of political football, given everything that had been said in the run-up to the summit, and warning that centrist parties were essentially in the last chance saloon in tackling some of these threats. I wonder if anything from today has maybe changed your concerns, or if those concerns still exist.
Well, those concerns definitely still exist, Alan, but I do feel some hope. I feel that today's discussion was a very, very important discussion. It was an important conversation that took place in the room because people were recognising that here in Scotland we have a problem, and we have a deep problem. It's a threat to our democracy. We are seeing rising attacks on vulnerable groups. We are seeing rising amount of dialogue and extreme right-wing ideology that is influencing our communities. And we are seeing a situation that is a real threat to our society and could end in a very, very dark place. And so it's a bit like standing up and saying, I am an alcoholic. That, you know, it's important that we had that conversation, that we acknowledged that something is wrong and that people are feeling deeply disenfranchised. And it was a very wide-ranging conversation. It identified a lot of the issues that are affecting people. We talked about, you know, so the breakdown of community, the lack of role models for young people. We talked about the lack of resources to support people in our most disenfranchised communities, the need to redistribute wealth more effectively. A whole range of issues came up, but we also talked about the very sophisticated campaigning and bad actors out there at a global level who are operating to ensure that disenfranchised communities, that people that are finding it hard to cope with their standard of living are receiving some really negative messaging. So there are people out there who are trying to take advantage of the economic situation that people are in. And the people who are in that situation, they're not stupid, but they are very much angry, they're feeling disenfranchised, they're feeling ignored for very good reasons. So there was a bit of humility in the room, I felt, and a recognition by the politicians that more needs to be done to make a material difference to people's lives, but also a recognition that we've got to start calling out this issue. You know, there are too many influences out there that are about let's punch down on the most vulnerable groups. And there is not enough recognition that actually the people that are responsible for a lot of the exploitation that people are feeling is actually the billionaire class in our society. So, you know, it was a very wide-ranging discussion. I was pleased to see it taking place.
Lorna.
I don't think any of us should be blind to the rise of authoritarianism across the world, fascist ideologies, what's happening in America to human rights, deportations without due process is terrifying. We do need to protect Scottish democracy to make sure that people's human rights are respected. And part of that is making sure that everyone in Scotland is engaged in politics and doesn't feel that politics is being done to them from a distance. So some of the conversation today was really practical. It was about things about how do we get politics closer to the people? Do we need smaller councils? Do we need people to be able to feel more engaged in that decision making? And has the amount of money that's going into elections to sway elections gone too far? Are billionaires effectively across the world able to buy elections? Where has one vote, one person, one vote gone? And reestablishing that so people feel their vote matters, that they're being, that when they know who their councillor is and they know how their tax money is being spent. Reestablishing that is fundamental to making our democracy work better. And I was very happy to hear these sorts of practical suggestions being discussed today.
Okay, thanks.
If I may, just briefly on the suggestions, I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is because I think the Scottish Government characterised this to me, and some of the solutions we discussed are inherently Liberal Democrat solutions around transparency, decentralisation, empowering people, re-engaging communities. And I think it was very heartening to see, I think, a cross-section of society signing up to those. This is a direction of travel I welcome from the government. I hope that we can stick to it. But yeah, like I said at the start, this should only be a start. If it's not a start, if this is the entirety of it, it's an ivory tower that consolidates that disconnect that people feel.
Okay, Jean Davison.
Thank you very much. Given everything you've said so far and the talk about polarisation, the talk about the public discourse being soured, I wonder if you think we'll ever hear a First Minister or a leading politician ever tell parts of the Scottish society again that their views on anything are not valid and that there should be no debate about anything, and whether or not you're worried that that is maybe what has led to a souring of discourse. And can I also, just ask you, Mr. Swinney, if you've ever discussed any of your issues around the far right and those threats in particular with the Prime Minister, because we know he has said today that he's concerned about the use of the St George's Cross by far right groups and how they need to sort of win back control over that particular flag. If you had any thoughts on that.
I can't. In general, the Prime Minister and I talk about kind of a wide variety of political trends. Let me say that. So we will have aired the unease that we have about some of these issues in society, but we haven't had a specific formal discussion about that point. But in the goodwill of the conversation that goes on between the Prime Minister and I, we will have touched on that territory. In relation to your substantive question, Gina, I have tried since I became First Minister just nearly a year ago to take an approach which engages substantially with people about the issues about which they're concerned and about which there are different and distinctive opinions. I will address people's opinions. I might not agree with them. I'll set out my stance, and that will be the approach that I take. But I'll do that in a respectful fashion. I think that's been part of what I promised I would do to Parliament. When I became First Minister a year ago, I promised Parliament I would be respectful in the way I took forward debate, and I'm doing my best to live up to that. Now, people probably will think that, like on most other things, I should be doing other things and I should be doing more of that, but my endeavour is to do exactly that, and I'll make every effort to ensure that's the case in the future. Please.
I think looking beyond just the last few months, I think if you look at the last decade of our general political discourse, I think there has been, for some people out there, the feeling that there's a delegitimization of their views, or somehow they can speak for Scotland, another one can't speak for Scotland, or they do represent a community or they don't represent a community. And I think that has soured politics to a certain extent. And I also think, whether deliberate or inadvertently, I think it has sounded like, for large sections of the population, that politicians are saying, you're too stupid to understand this bit, or you're too racist to understand this bit, or you're too bigoted to understand this bit. And that has only further pushed certain communities further away from politics and fed that disenfranchisement. And so therefore I think allowing everyone to freely debate, as long as they are of course respectful, but freely debate, freely disagree, but then come to decisions that positively impact people's lives is going to be really, really important.
Okay, thanks. Sarah.
As First Minister has said, as an organisation with its roots in the 1930s, which was about coming together across business, government, wider society, to do something about the economic crisis that faced the country. I was delighted to be representing our wider membership, wider civil society. For me, the really positive takeaway from today was the richness of our civil society organisations, the commitment shown by our faith communities to listening, to actually understanding where people are coming from. And everybody on this panel has articulated that a lot of people are feeling really like they're not being listened to and they are not achieving economic success. It takes all of us to build a successful economy, and business has a role to play in that too. And we're in a global competition right now. There's incredible economic turbulence. There are considerable parallels to be drawn with the 1930s. So I think this coming together is incredibly important, and understanding and creating common ground on which we can move forward, and understanding the trade-offs and the compromises, and for the things that are in Scotland's long-term interests, to ensure that the jobs and the high-value jobs are here. That's the best way. That democratic stability is the best foundation for our economy to grow and prosper, and for us to continue to compete in a global economy.
Thanks, Sarah. We're going to move to Craig Meehan, who's going to shout at us in the back of the room.
Great, thanks. Reform UK views this as an establishment stitch-up by politicians scared of their rise in the poll. Are you scared that this becomes basically an inadvertent advert for reform in the voters who already feel disconnected from some of the mainstream parties here?
I think what this is about drawing Scottish society together to recognise the dangers that we face to our democratic system, and to making sure that we do everything we can to re-engage people in our democratic processes and to cherish our democratic processes so they can work for people. So that's what the purpose of it's been about. It's not been just a grouping of politicians. We've leaders of very significant civic organisations at the table just now. We had over 50 organisations represented around the table today of a variety of deeply connected civic, faith and societal organisations. And it's about bringing people together in common, to find common ground, which is, I think, an important objective at a time when our society faces so many of the threats that it faces just now. So we're going to put a wee bit of pace into things. So Libby Brooks, can I come to you next, please?
Thank you. You've been talking a lot about participation, and I was just wondering, so focusing back on Holyrood, why you think it is that so many women MSPs, in particular SNP women, are stepping down at the next Holyrood elections, and what can be done to change that?
I think, well, certainly amongst SNP female members of Parliament, I think there's probably a number of things happening at the same time. Some people have been members of Parliament. Some of my colleagues have been members of Parliament for a long time, and they're deciding they've done their stint, and I can understand that. I think some of my colleagues are finding the challenges of reconciling all of the different balances of life a challenge in being members of Parliament. And I think there's some people who are absolutely and totally undermined by the level of hostility they've got to endure in public life. And I think part of what we talked about today was, and we had contributions from organisations specialising in this area of policy around the table, expressed their concern about exactly that. And that will not be unique to my party. That'll be, it'll be shared across a range of different political parties and a variety of different people who stand for public election. Our local authority colleagues were making that very point in the course of the conversation this morning. Ros, now come to you.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I'm not a politician, but I'm a woman in a public position in Scotland, and I have certainly seen a negativity that has not been witnessed before in the last few years, and a worsening negativity in terms of some of the tone of some of the feedback, and I think that's indicative. If you talk to some of our members who work in schools as well, about some of the levels of misogyny that we're seeing coming through, that we're having to deal with, and the particular issue of who's influencing our young men now in Scotland. These are some of the wider issues that does affect our democracy. It affects getting women who are prepared to come forward and put themselves and their families through that sort of experience. It's not pleasant when people seem to object to your right to say something as a starting point because you're a woman, never mind what you say they object to. So I think that is a real issue in our society that we have to call out, and for me, I don't mind saying that I think that, you know, Reform are a different sort of political party. Nigel Farage has come out and said things like, you know, he doesn't believe women employees who are of childbearing age are as valuable as male employees. He doesn't believe in employment rights or that we should have statutory maternity pay. You know, so these are some of the attitudes that a party like that's dealing with. He's quite happy to be photographed doing the thumbs up with Andrew Tate. You know, there is a reason why reform is an issue that comes up when you start to have a conversation about the far right. They're just a symptom of a wider problem, but these are the things that we need to call out, and we do have to start calling this out. You know, it's not just another party. There are some really deeply objectionable issues that they have some deeply objectionable views on, and I don't mind sitting here and saying that is no friend of the working classes. What we need for a stronger society that supports ordinary working people is a more equal society, and we need a society that values women, that values people from our BAM communities, that values people with disabilities. And, you know, our politicians need to pull their socks up and do a lot more to support those people if they don't want to lose our working class communities.
Thanks, Ros. And Laura.
Thank you. Although, as far as I know, all the Scottish Green women are re-standing, which I'm delighted about because we've got an excellent team. Being a woman MSP is a tough gig. Being a woman in any sort of public space is a tough gig, but being an MSP is a tough gig. One of the things we didn't actually get to discuss today, but I think is relevant to the sort of souring of our political discourse, is this dehumanizing of politicians. We are public servants. We have been elected to serve our people, and we do the very best we can. We are also only human as well. And the level of scrutiny that we are put under, the level of attack we come under, particularly on social media, and for things that are irrelevant to how we do our jobs, how we look, what we wear, is very, very difficult. And one of the things I think politics would benefit from is more women, more diversity in that, but it is very hard to look a talented woman in the face and say, you should come and do this job, because the first thing is, well, what are the security requirements? What happens when I'm attacked online? You know, we have had politicians murdered in the UK in the last few years. I am asking women who stand for election to put their lives at risk. And that is a scary thing to do. So yes, it is a scary thing to be a woman politician, and I'm hoping that this work that the First Minister is leading will help make politics a safer space, not only for people who vote and need to participate in it from wider society, but for those of us public servants who do the front edge of that politics.
Okay, Chris McCall.
Thank you, First Minister. This is a question to yourself and anyone on the panel who wants to jump in and answer after you. How will you judge that this process has been a success? For example, if after the next Holyrood election we have 10 or more MSPs from the party that Ros mentioned there, Reform UK, if we have 10 or more MSPs from that party, will have this process been a failure?
Well, obviously the electorate will vote for who they choose to vote for, and that's a matter for the electorate, but and we have to deal with the consequences of that. For my part, I don't want to, as I said earlier, I don't want to look back in a few years' time and think that I didn't do anything, and I didn't use my office as First Minister, the convening power of First Minister, to register the fact that we have got serious threats to our democratic system and our values in Scotland, and I want to do everything I can to make sure I can look back with all honesty that I've done everything I can to bring people together to face the threats that we're facing. And I think they're acute, Chris. I think they're very real. And my colleagues have set out in different ways some of those threats. And I want to act. And the mark of all of this will be how we engage to follow up the discussions we've had today. We've had a really good starting point today, but we have to build on that and take forward that dialogue. Okay, I would
just say success and failure is going to be measured by whether we improve people's lives or not. Now, the First Minister and I will disagree what success and failure looks like in next year's Scottish Parliament election. There's no point pretending otherwise. But ultimately, success or failure will be judged on whether people's lives improve or not.
Thanks. Now, Simon Johnson's next on my list, but I don't see Simon here, so that's fine. So can I come to Louise Wilson? Louise.
Thanks, First Minister. So my question is more for the opposition leaders in the room. So trust across all political parties is really low, and that is what's driving people towards sort of the more who they view the more anti-establishment parties. Now, we've already heard today that part of rebuilding that trust is about government delivery, but we're a year to go to the Holyrood election. So as opposition parties, what are you doing to improve trust?
Great question. And the first thing to say is, I actually, for all the criticism that, and I wholeheartedly agree with Ros's comments about Nigel Farage and his party, but actually the people that are being tempted to go towards those kind of politicians, I don't think are doing it because they are naturally politically aligned to those individuals, or indeed they see a likeness with those individuals. To be honest, I think many people are going towards that direction as, to put it in a crude sense, as an FU vote, because they're so scunnered with institutions, with political parties, with governments, and with not feeling as if things work for them. And so my responsibility as a leader of an opposition political party is making sure we go into election next year with a credible programme that persuades people that we can make their lives better and that government can work for them. I'm sure that's what other political parties on this platform would say. I'm sure that's what the government would say. But I take that challenge head on, that we have got to go into a programme next year that can earn people's trust, earn their support, and show them that we can make this country work and we can make government work.
And so much of this discussion today has been about disconnection, people feeling disconnected. What we're doing in my party to reverse that is actually going to meet people where they are. I don't mean where their headspace is at, but actually going to their houses. I mean, that's part of why we achieved so much in the best election for Lib Dems in a century just last summer. It's just door by door and street by street. And I don't think we do that enough, re-engaging with people, being visible, so they have a named person, an individual they can go to with their problems and expect some kind of satisfaction on that.
Patrick?
Yeah, I personally believe that the ideas and values of the far right need to be challenged and opposed, and for far too long they have been emulated. Whether that's on anti-migrant rhetoric, whether that's stigmatising LGBT people, whether we're now seeing it with some parties re-embracing climate denial as an ideology that we thought had been defeated years ago, and emulating the values and ideas of the far right is only going to give more political space to them. So in my view, we have to ensure that all political parties stop that and start openly challenging those ideas and offering genuine solutions to contrast the fake solutions that the far right offers. I do want to acknowledge, though, that there's a certain aspect of this that gets bounced back to the media, because you all have a difficult job to do as well. Those of you who are trying to uphold serious fact-based journalism know that you're working in an environment where people are being bombarded with disinformation and misinformation online, and by sections of the billionaire-owned media who are happily promoting the same hard right values as well. So giving people political answers to those questions is relevant, but making sure that they have access to fact-based information and an ability to tell the difference between the truth and the lies that are being thrown at them is equally critical.
Ash?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that we're seeing people wanting to look for an alternative political party that's not one of the mainstream parties is that many people in our society feel like the political discussions we're having, in Holyrood but also outside, do not represent their views. They feel like the politicians are not listening to them. They feel that we're not engaging with the challenges that they're facing in their lives. So it's also the fact that, not only are we not listening and sort of talking down to them, if you like, in a number of areas, that the country isn't working for them either. So you can understand that's why people feel they want to go and make a different choice. So I think the job of the politicians that are sitting at this table here is to engage with the public, to listen to them, not to talk down to them, to make sure we have a full and frank debate about the challenges that this country is facing, which are many and substantial in some areas, and to make people feel that they're included in that, and to offer them a real solution to their problems, and to listen to the issues that they want to talk about, not to tell them what we think their view should be, I think there is quite a bit of that at the moment. So hopefully no debate is over and we can listen very carefully to what the public want us to do for them as politicians for the country, you know, in the coming years.
Thanks, Ash. And Rose, you want to add something, and then we are going to have to make...
Yeah, I mean, my plea to all the political parties in terms of manifestos for next year and what they can actually do is be honest, keep your promises, and be realistic and honest with the electorate about what's deliverable and what it's going to take to deliver. And that is why we need a more grown-up conversation around issues like wealth tax, to actually properly fund our public services and give our communities the that they actually need in this current economic situation. So I would ask for them all to take a real dose of honesty potion and then follow up and deliver on their promises.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Right, we've got 6 journalists to get through, and time is very, very short. So can we keep it kind of tight? Alistair Ferguson from the National. Alistair.
Thank you, First Minister. I appreciate you saying that this is just the beginning of, the summit, and they've got a long way to go. I'm curious, have you been able to kind of get to the root of the problem of the rise in far right? And I'm also interested in, how are you planning on winning back disinterested and disenfranchised voters who are looking at reform and they're just giving them, in their eyes, simple solutions?
Well, I think they are simple solutions, Alistair, and I think we've got to, the measure of this for everybody and about society in general is about engaging properly with people in their communities and engaging in that discussion, which is what I think you're hearing from everybody around this table they are committed to doing. In relation to taking this forward, what I set out to the discussion today is the government will use its convening power as it's used today to bring people together and to, from today, draw out the different areas of work that we can take forward that will help to address some of that disaffection, and we'll do that in a collaborative way with other political parties. Okay, Lewis Mackenzie. Lewis.
Thank you, First Minister. Can I just ask, how much responsibility do you and the SNP government take for some of that disenfranchisement that people feel given some of the failings in the NHS, public services? And if I could also just ask, would you describe the 167,000 odd people that voted for reform at the election last year as being part of the far right?
No, I wouldn't. I think those individuals feel disaffected and they are making that choice, and it's a choice that I think I want to dissuade people from making that choice. In relation to the responsibility, for us, I'm First Minister of Scotland. I've been a political leader for a long time. I had a wee bit of a break in the process. I would point out that we were elected in 2021 with the largest share of the vote, if my memory serves me right, of any political party in the history of devolution. So there has been a lot of engagement around about our party, but these are issues that will be sorted out at the election in May of next year. Andrew Lermarth, The Herald. Andrew.
Thanks, First Minister. Anis, has John Swinney not just played you like a fiddle here? Because you've given Reform an almighty boost, and the only party on the table whose lunch is being eaten by Nigel Farage is yours.
No, I don't accept that because, one, I think all the organisations that came today came in good faith, and I think it would talk down those individuals to suggest that they were not politically savvy enough. That's the first thing. Secondly, I'm really clear about government failure having to be addressed if we are going to take on the disenfranchisement and the division. And third, and this will be arguments I'm sure will play out over the course of the next year going up to the election next year, the reality is at the other end of that election it's either going to be John as First Minister or me, and I've got to make my case, John will make his case over the course of the next year, and we both have, I imagine, interest to want to persuade people that we can deliver a different future for our country that doesn't require divisive politics or the policies of Nigel Farage or Reform.
And I would simply say that I invited everybody to take part in this discussion in good faith, and I welcome the fact that they all did so. David Ball. David.
Thank you, First Minister. One of the issues that the far right spread misinformation about is immigration and asylum. But Glasgow City Council has warned that some of the pressures on that city are risking damaging social cohesion. Are you concerned that that sort of language and narrative could kind of play into the hands of the far right? And the council's also asked the UK government to pause Glasgow being a dispersal city for asylum seekers. Are you concerned that Glasgow may no longer taking asylum seekers?
I think what this issue relates to is the fact that the City of Glasgow is wrestling with a significant volume of asylum applications without the resources from the Home Office to support them deal with that challenge. So it's not an unwillingness. The city has been an incredibly accommodating place over many, many years. The issue is that there isn't a commensurate support to the housing infrastructure that is coming for that area of activity. Now, obviously, we have an obligation to invest in affordable housing stock in Scotland. You'll be familiar, we've increased the budget for that in this financial year. But there's I think a reasonable point and request that is made by Glasgow City Council to the Home Office to support them in dealing with the implications of a policy issue which is entirely reserved. Okay, Tom Gordon.
A question for the First Minister. You mentioned the issue of disinformation. Is saying a trans woman is a woman disinformation?
Well, that issue has been settled by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's given us the basis in law for that to be the case, and that is what I accept.
You said a few moments ago that a trans woman is a woman.
Well,
your colleague that you're sharing a platform with at an anti-disinformation summit transmitted what some people regard as disinformation. Do you regard what he said as disinformation?
And I'm setting out to you that I think this issue is settled by the conclusions of the Supreme Court judgment that was made the other day.
You mentioned the Supreme Court is describing the Supreme Court as a source of prejudice, bigotry and hatred, disinformation.
I think it is wrong to do that, because at no stage should we question the independence of the judiciary and the judicial system, because it operates in everybody's interests in an entirely neutral fashion in accordance with the rule of law. Tom.
It's a super quick one. We saw circulated earlier a draft communique, a text you're asking people to sign. Did you all manage to sign it?
Yes. Okay. Simeon Kerr.
Thanks, First Minister. Well, if you could go back to immigration and expand a bit more about, what discussions, deliberations you had about the role of immigration in the rise of the far right and what solutions you might have for that.
I think there's a positive case to be made for migration. I can't speak to a business sector in Scotland that doesn't express to me the fact that they are struggling for employees because of the contraction of our working age population. Now, that to me is that's an argument I have made for many, many years. It was an argument actually 20 odd years ago that really troubled one of my predecessors, Jack McConnell, to such an extent that he successfully negotiated a preferential approach to encouraging migration into Scotland with the United Kingdom government. And at that stage I supported him. I think his arguments were valid then because of the need to boost our working age population. So there is a positive argument to be made for migration. And I think that's part of the process of engaging with our population in Scotland, that there is an opportunity for us to make that positive case. If I go back to the outcome of the referendum on EU membership, Scotland voted decisively in favour of remaining in the European Union. Why was that the case? I would contend it was because the political leadership in Scotland across all political parties was making the positive case for EU membership. That was not the case south of the border, and hey presto, we ended up getting an outcome inflicted upon us that we didn't want and we didn't support. So there is a vital place for the exercise of political leadership on these sensitive issues, and I'm certainly happy to exercise it.